Okay, entrance to venue. Electrical. Roll-up doors, potential bathroom areas. Venue space. I started off playing guitars and being more in bands, rock bands, playing everything from, you know, industrial music and playing in local punk bands and doing kind of just like the local LA band scene, basically. At one point, I remember that I had lost a drummer, and drummers were really, really difficult for me to come across. And I wanted to record a demo. I had written a bunch of music and I wanted to record a demo, but I had no clue how to do that demo. And I remember one day just randomly reading an article of a band that I highly admired at the time, and reading that that person had recorded and produced an entire album by himself, that he had walked in, and that concept was completely foreign to me. Like, I had no clue how you could possibly do that. So I scrounged up enough, you know, lunch money and bought a 4-track tape recorder from a pawn shop and started playing with that. And I remember I had like a few drum kit pieces in the studio and I was playing with it. So that was kind of like my first introduction into using, like, you know, multi-track recordings and stuff like that. After I started playing in bands a little bit more, I was kind of really into more aggressive music, and I had a lot of friends that were listening to house music and kind of getting into the early 90s rave thing in LA, but it was kind of foreign to me since I was kind of like strictly in this band thing. And a buddy of mine handed me a mixtape, which was like an old Hard Acid mixtape put out by this company called Pure Acid Mixtapes here in LA, and it was a DJ Tron mixtape. And I listened to that, and I remember exactly, like, right away on the fly being extremely attracted to just the aggressiveness of it, and like all the weird abstract electronic sounds to me at the time that was completely foreign, that I had never heard anything like that. Completely blew my mind. I mean, I've never heard anything like that before, and it was extremely inspiring for me. And over time I refined my taste a little bit and got really into like some of the early Plastic Man stuff. I remember when I first picked up Sheet 1 and completely blown away by that. And that was actually kind of my gateway into learning more about early Detroit techno. And from there it was more like Jeff Mills, and then getting into, you know, Kenny Larkin, Kevin Saunderson, and all those, you know, early Detroit legends. In the late 90s, around 97, 98, I had started a small little record label with my buddies here in LA called Mad 12, and it was essentially like a vinyl record that we had put out, and we had just recorded a bunch of random samples and weird electronic music sounds, and it was just an abstract piece of weird sounds that we had put out. And then shortly after that, I kind of wanted to really focus purely on starting my own techno label, and that kind of came to me wanting to just change my moniker, come up with something different, and came up with the Drumcell name. And I think that was about 2000, and since 2000 on, I've just been using that moniker Drumcell purely for my techno stuff. And there has been other monikers that I've been using for more like experimental music, or some of my more noise influenced stuff, or industrial stuff, which hopefully someday more people will be able to get to hear. I come from more of a pure hardware background. It was a lot of, like, I mean, just the typical techno analog, you know, gear that most people use, whether it being a 909, a 303, 808s, you know, MC202, SH101, all this like kind of like hardware gear, and using, you know, a lot of samplers and groove boxes and stuff like that to produce music. I reached a point in my life where I was trying to like work on computers and produce music on computers, and then also trying to work my hardware into it, and there was like just a massive amount of issues and conflicts that had come when trying to join those two worlds together, whether it being like making sure something is syncing on time with the host application, or make sure the DAW is setting clock to the right things. It was just, there was more technical problems that were running in my way than actually getting creative stuff out of my mind. You know what I mean? So I had just said, you know what, forget it, that's it. If I'm going to work on a computer, that's all I'm going to use. And I went purely software for years. And little by little, my studio just started to diminish because I just found myself getting rid of hardware that I didn't really need. But over time of doing that and doing a lot of records, I started running into a lot of problems where I just felt really uninspired by just sitting in front of a computer with a mouse just clicking on buttons. I wasn't coming up with cool ideas, and there was a nostalgic sense of me where I remember the days when I used to sit down and didn't really care about sonic fidelity or any of these like really technical things, and it was just about like plugging in some weird synth into a guitar pedal and recording that distortion and running it through some feedback loops and like sampling that and running it back, and no matter how shitty it sounded, I had a great time doing it. And at that point I really started to evolve more going back to using hardware again, because simply I've always kind of like really believed in the idea that if you're not having fun what you're doing, why are you doing it? Recently I'm using this Bassline Acid Lab synthesizer, which is basically just a 303 emulator, and I'm not even really using the 303 stuff inside of it. I'm basically just using the sequencer that's built into it. So it's like a 303 style sequencer, and I'm using what has control voltage out, gate outputs, and the accent out, going straight into the modular synthesizer. Mainly the bass line's probably receiving clock from Ableton, just getting clock into it, so it's running in sync and in time. And collection of different oscillators that I could use, whether it being the Z3000 from Tip Top Audio or the complex VCO from the Model 15 from Plan B. Recently just picked up the Hertz Donuts and Piston Honda from Harvestman. One of the really cool things about this in particular is the Z8000 Matrix Sequencer Programmer, which is basically a 16-step sequencer where I can actually control pitch or velocity with these individual knobs, and the sequencer runs in a whole vast amount of different directions, basically go right to left, or even up and down, so that I can send multiple different sequences to something, be able to maybe the voltage control filter from Harvestman, have the sequencer control the cutoff resonance or something like that. And then I find myself having to separate my sessions into two different types of sessions. One of them just being completely sort of a sound design session, and then the second session being more of like a programming or kind of producing session. And after I've spent an entire day of just sitting on my knees plugging things into guitar pedals and making weird sounds, then I can actually stop and go to sleep and wake up the next day, come into the studio and have this entire palette of weird sounds and weird music, so that when I open up my sequencer and I'm actually ready to produce a track, I've already got these kind of like folders and individual sound libraries of all these weird sounds that I've created, so I can kind of build tracks and work from there. I've kind of let go of this like control aspect of my mind, just like trying to control everything that I'm doing. When I do stuff that I'm not particularly planning, I personally feel that's some of my most creative stuff, and it's kind of like the raw shit, and it's also the most truthful thing that I feel comes out of me. There's all these rules when it comes to making music. It seems like, you can't do too much of this, or you can't do too much of that, and you can't do, and there shouldn't be rules. just do whatever the hell you want, and if it sounds cool, fine, and if it doesn't, then do something different. The first Droid record we did through a company called Capsule Labs, who's based here in LA, and they're actually still doing vinyl. But at that time, Capsule Labs was like pressing their records out of the garage of a warehouse in downtown LA. And I had gone to Gil, who runs Capsule Lab, and just said, I got these tracks, I want to start a label, I don't have a lot of money, I just want to make a record. And I remember literally being there with him in his garage while he was cutting the lacquers, sending it off to the metalworks, bringing it back, mixing vinyl pellets, melting them, dropping them onto the platters, watching them being made, come down the thing and actually trim the edges of the record, and putting them in our sleeves ourselves and actually boxing them. It was like such a grassroots thing, and it felt amazing to do that, to have like such a hands-on experience with the production of your own music and your own vinyl. And I remember when we made the first Droid record, the first thing we did is we took a trip to Detroit for the Detroit Electronic Music Festival. And the intentions were just to give out as many free records as we possibly could. And to my surprise, I really had no expectations whatsoever. I kind of just expected people to just throw the records away. We got a massive reaction from people that actually enjoyed the record. We got tons of emails, and I remember that year that we were handing out that record at the festival. It was like, because the festival's, you know, multiple day festival. It was like the next day I went to the festival and it was like being played on multiple stages. Like people were actually playing the record on the spot. And that energy that I had received, where people were actually accepting what we were doing and liking what we were doing, was just enough fuel and gave me the energy to continue. Just like, don't stop, and we haven't. Just continue to be pushing out those vinyl records. We still press vinyl today. We're still vinyl enthusiasts, although the largest majority of us are like more digital DJs. There's a passion and a sense of respect and an attachment to the roots of where we all came from, and I believe that solely comes from, you know, the vinyl records itself.